want to introduce my friend Joe G. from McKinney, Texas.
Thank you, Victor. My name is Joe Gray, and I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date is August 27th, 1988, and I'm really thankful for that today. It's so good to be here with you this weekend.
Sorry.
It's okay. So good to be here with you this weekend. I want to thank the committee for inviting me and making this possible. But I want to thank you out there, because without you, this would not be possible. Y'all have made this weekend special for me, and I salute you, and I'm glad you are here. I'm glad I'm here. We've been trying to do this for a couple of years, I think. I remember when Victor called and asked me to do this a couple of years ago. I said, well, sure, I was open. I said, sure. And then, of course, we all know what happened. You know, COVID comes along, and he calls and said, well, we're going to have to call it off because of COVID. And he said, will you be able to come next year? And I said, well, if I'm alive, I will. So then we planned it for the next year. And then he called and said, you know what, we're going to have to cancel it again. And I said, Victor, this is getting old. But we finally got together and got here, and I really have enjoyed it. I've missed this part of my recovery for the last couple of years. I've only been to a couple of these in the last couple of years. One of them was about a month ago, and it was good to be back with all of those folks again, and I got a little taste of what it would be like here this weekend. And I was so glad to be here and so grateful that y'all are here. It's just, this is an amazing deal. It really, really is. I wish y'all could be up here looking out and look at all these eyeballs looking back at me this morning. That's great. It's a great scene. I'm one of those alcoholics who shouldn't have made it. And I know we got some more out here that shouldn't have made it. And before I get too far into this, I want to thank all the other speakers. I'm not going to try to call everybody by name because I'll forget somebody. I'm getting that age. But I have enjoyed every one of them, and I've gotten something from each one. My friend Victor was telling me the other day that he had some good speakers lined up, and I knew he did, and it's been a great time. When I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't come here to get sober. I'm sure all of y'all did. I came here just to get the heat off and hopefully get back up in the big bed. That's the only reason I came, and because I didn't think I was one of you. But we'll get to that in a little bit. I know we'll get to the cart before the horse. But one of the things that I am really glad of this conference, and not every conference is like this, y'all have Al-Anon participation. And my friend Beverly, who had to leave this morning early to get back to catch her flight, I've known Beverly for 35 years. So when she was telling her story yesterday, I started reminiscing and thinking back of what happened to me and my wife. I miss my wife. We're going to talk about that a little more this morning. She and I have been married for 46 years, and I've got a picture of her on my phone, and I looked at it just a while ago. And I wish she could be here this weekend. But anyway, that's another story. But anyway, I've got some friends, Paul and Linda. They're in the program too. Linda's in Al-Anon, and Paul is in Alcoholics Anonymous. And a few years ago, old Paul had to go take an insurance exam, and so he went, and the doctor did all the tests and did everything, and he came out and said, Paul, I got some bad news for you. he said, you've got a rare blood disorder, and you've got only 24 hours to live. Paul said, that's got to be a mistake. He said, I thought it was. I had my colleagues look at all these tests, and I'm sorry to tell you, that's just the way it is. So Paul left the office. He walked around town for a while, thinking, how am I going to go home and tell this to Linda? And so he finally just wore himself out and got home and told Linda the bad news. And of course, they cried, reminisced on all the things they had done in their marriage, and now the things they weren't going to be able to do. They just wore themselves out. And finally, they went to bed, just worn out. And Paul looked at Linda and said, Linda, he said, I've got 12 hours left. He said, you think we might make love just one more time? She said, well, I suppose so, Paul. So they did. And over the night, he tapped her on his shoulder and said, Linda, I've got 8 hours left. He said, you think we might make love just once again? She said, well, I suppose so, Paul. So they did. And over the night, he tapped her on his shoulder and said, Linda, I got 4 hours left. She said, Paul, I got to get up in the morning, and you don't. That's the kind of Al-Anons I hang out with. You know, we spend a lot of time in Alcoholics Anonymous talking about what happened. And we should. That's how we can relate our stories one to the other, what happened. And we're not the only ones that do that. They do that, the people outside do that that's never been in one of these meetings. Give you an example. We could hear a car crash right outside the building here, and somebody run up and ask them what happened. Or you're sitting at home watching a little TV and you hear a big crash of dishes out there in the kitchen. You're probably going to go out and inquire what happened. Or you hear a young child cry out in pain, and somebody's going to probably ask them what happened. You remember, don't you? Oh, you do. About 2,000 years ago, when the Master healed the blind man, Bartimaeus. He was on the way to the crucifixion, and he met Bartimaeus on the trail. And Bartimaeus was blind. He said, Savior, restore my sight. And he did. And someone walked up to him and says, what happened? He said, I don't know. Once I was blind, and now I see. You ask me what happened? I don't know. Once I was drunk, and now I'm sober. I'll tell you what I think happened to me. I think Alcoholics Anonymous happened to me. And because of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was introduced to a loving God that I never even knew existed for me. And this is my story. At one time, I think I was well. I was about 6. Nothing was going on. I was born and raised in a little country town down there in Mississippi, and all us kids did, we just played in the woods and the creeks and the ponds. Had a wonderful existence, kind of like Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. It's kind of how we grew up, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful. Then I fell in love with an older woman. Her name was Susan. She was 7 and I was 6. And Susan and I were up underneath her front porch steps playing show and tell or feel or squeal or one of those childhood games. And her mama caught us and drug us out from underneath those porch steps. And there we were standing with no clothes on. Her mother looked at me. She said, Joe Gray, if you ever do this again, your thing's going to fall off. I looked down at Susan, and hers had done fell off. And her mama grabbed me by the hand and took me down to my house. We lived about 3 houses down the block. And went in, she told my mother what she had found us doing. And she left. My mother looked at me. She said, did you do that? I said, no, ma'am, it wasn't me. Now, I know she didn't believe that, but here's the message I got. Nothing ever was brought up or said about that ever again. So what I heard was this. You tell a lie, and somebody believes it. It's not a lie anymore. And I spent my whole life telling you how I wanted you to perceive me, and most of it wasn't even close to the truth. I didn't have my first drink at 6. I probably could have used one. Well, that's not when I took it. For from a family of alcoholics. My grandfather was an alcoholic. My father was an alcoholic. I had 3 or 4 uncles who were alcoholic. Had several cousins who were alcoholic. I had 2 stepkids who were alcoholic, and 2 of my 3 kids were alcoholic. I got a brother and 2 sisters that were alcoholic. But I'm not an alcoholic because of my relationship to any of those people. I'm an alcoholic because I drank too much alcohol. I did it all by myself. Nobody forced me to ever take a drink. I took the first one. It was a hot June night, 1958. And me and 3 of my old pals went out to the county line, and I got a 6-pack of Busch Bavarian beer. I remember back then they called it Busch Bavarian. The ladies, they just dropped the Bavarian and just called it Busch. But when I drank it, it was Busch Bavarian beer, and I could see the cool snow and the mountains on the can, and it was wonderful. And I got my 6-pack, and I drank them all. And the next thing I know, we're at a truck stop, and I'm arm wrestling this truck driver about something. I don't know what it was about. But things like that used to just happen around me. As I said, it was a hot June night, and I got sick, and I went outside, and I threw up, and I laid down in the back seat of that old 49 Plymouth. After a while, the guys came out, and they said, well, let's go home. I said, no, let's get some more beer. Well, they didn't want any, but we went back to the county line. I got another 6-pack, and I don't remember how many of those I drank. I don't know if I had 1 or 2 or all of them. It didn't matter. I had made my point. You see, real men like me could drink, get drunk, throw up, and go drink again. Those pantywaists could not do that. I held myself out to be different the very first time I drank. This is how I know that. About a year before this drinking incident, me and the same bunch of guys had gone out to this lake to camp out and go fishing. We were too young to get anything to drink, but we had to do something daring, don't you know? So we all got us a cigar. And we're sitting around that old campfire, and I'm sucking on that half-a-Tampa cigar. The rest of the guys took 1 puff and threw them in the fire, not me. I smoked that thing all the way down, swallowed all that juice, got sicker than a dog, and I threw up. And the next morning, those guys were up cooking eggs and bacon over the campfire. And I got sick again just smelling that. And I told them, I said, that cigar stuff is the nastiest thing I've ever seen. And as long as I live, I'll never have another one. As I stand before you this morning, I've never had another cigar. But that's not the way it was with alcohol. I got it every chance I could. I lied, I cheated, I stole to get it. In the little old town I grew up in, I had one of my uncles was on the police force. Another one was a county commissioner. And the scrapes I got myself into, they were able to pull the strings to get me out of it. So I didn't have to suffer a lot of consequences by my drinking. We did a lot of things that we should have been in jail for, but we just escaped that. My senior year in high school, I got kicked off the basketball team for drinking. I don't know how that coach knew we were drinking. It wasn't in the daytime that we were drinking, it was at night. But we were running wind sprints one afternoon down in the gym, and I threw up. And he called me over there, and he said, you're going to be dismissed from the team for your drinking. I wondered how he knew I was drinking. Because you could smell the puke all over it smelled like beer. And I guess that gave me away, I don't know. But I wasn't worried about that because we were having a losing season, and he was the new coach there, so it was all right. But I graduated high school, got a scholarship to play college football, and I went off to play football, and about the 3rd week of training camp, I blew my knee out. And they wanted to operate, and I didn't want them to, and we went round and around on that, and finally I convinced them they couldn't operate it, and they said, well, if we can't operate it, then you're no good to us, we're going to cut your scholarship. I said, okay, that's fine. I'll go to Texas. I had been to Texas once, and I had an uncle that lived in Texas, and I liked Texas. And so I called him up, and I said, hey, college didn't work out. He said, well, you got a job with me. Didn't even know what he did for a living. When I got out to Wichita Falls, I found out what he did for a living. He and another guy they were partners in an oil field equipment company, and they sold all used equipment, drill pipe, and all that kind of stuff for working in the oil field. And his idea for me was to drive an 18-wheeler delivering that equipment around all over Texas and all over the western United States. And so that's what we started doing. I was driving one truck and this other guy was driving another, and the first trip we went out on, we were going up to Farmington, New Mexico. And we got to Tucumcari, and the other truck driver said, "Get us a room over there, and I'm going to go get us something to drink." And so I got us a room. It was two little old twin beds, wasn't much wider than this podium. About a 10-inch black and white TV sitting over there in the middle. He brought back 2 quarts of Champion bourbon. We sat on the end of those little beds, and we passed it back till we drank until we went to sleep or passed out. I don't remember which. But in those days, I could drink a lot. I could work all day, drink all night, and it didn't bother me. It was a while before that was to catch up with me. And then a few weeks later, we were out in Arizona bringing something back, and we're driving back in. It's about 2 or 3 in the morning. I'm seeing those old white stripes down the middle of the highway slipping by. And I started thinking. The old Norm Alpin used to say, an alcoholic, you either think or drink. He said, never do them both at the same time. And I was thinking that night, and the thought came to me, your love life sure sucks. And it did, because I was gone all the time. And the next idea came, he said, well, if you were married, you'd probably have a job in town. Well, when I got back to Wichita Falls, I told this one suspect I had about this idea. She said, that's a great idea, let's get married. So we got married. I quit my uncle's company and went to work for a local oil field supply company. And I had arrived. Where I worked was right across the street from one of my all-time favorite bars, the Wee Lounge. Classic place. It was spelled that French spelling of "we," don't you know? It had to be classy. I'd go over there, we'd get off at 5:30, and I'd go over there, and I'd think, I'm going to have a couple, and I'm going home. I went over there and have a couple, and at 1 in the morning or 2 in the morning, I'd be beating on the bar saying, how'd this happen again? I remember when I read Bill's story the first time, he was beating on the bar saying that same thing, how did this happen again? I didn't mean for that to happen. I would do it over and over and over again. We'd been married 11 months and our first child was born. When that child was born, I could not go home again like a husband and a father should. And one night, my wife would admonish me and say, if you love this baby, you wouldn't do this. If you love me, you wouldn't do this. I loved him, I guess, as much as I was capable, but couldn't keep from it. I remember one night I went home. It was about 2 in the morning. I had nowhere else to go. All the bars were closed. That's the only time I would go home. And I fell through the front door because I'm laying on the floor, and my wife gets up and goes and wakes the baby up, and she's holding her up like this, looking down at me. She said, if you love this baby, you wouldn't do this. And I love that baby. I could not stop, and I didn't know why. That was 1963. I could have used this program in 63, didn't know it was here. Wouldn't have come if I'd known it. You know what to say about us, we're just not ready till we're ready. A few days after that, I go to work, and they call me in and said, you've been terminated. I said, for what? I had a great job, and I liked it, and I was good at it. I was an inventory control guy. Back in those days, we used a Cardex system, and I did a good job. They said, well, you had a big shipment of hand tools that came in, and we know they were here, but they never got entered on the books. We figured you're in on it, it's an inside job, and you're a part of it. I didn't have no idea what they were talking about. I had a deep resentment against those folks for many, many years. Now, I had been stealing money off of their gasoline credit card for about a year and a half. But you see, they weren't really paying me what I deserved. So I told them, I said, well, I'll just go get a job with your competitor down in Louisiana, and we'll break your rotten old company. That's not exactly what I told them. That's what I thought. And so I go all the way down to Louisiana, I get another job, and I got a better job, driving a better car, and drinking better whiskey, drinking in better places, sometimes. Not all the time. Still couldn't go home. I had a field sales job where I called on the drilling rigs out in the swamp. I'd been over in Natchez, Mississippi for a couple of days drinking. And it was about 6 in the morning, and I'm heading back into my headquarters in Louisiana. I get in about 7:30. There's no point in going home, starting another fight. I just went on to work in the same clothes I've been wearing for a couple of days. At about noon that day, I'm driving down the highway. I'll drift off to sleep, and I drift off the highway, dead center to an oak tree. And the engine was right up here in the front seat with me. I had, the steering wheel was bent double. I broke the ignition key off in my kneecap. I had cuts and teeth loose. It was a mess. And the company, back in the early 60s, seat belts were an option. They weren't all in all cars. And the company, about 2 weeks before that, had installed seat belts in all the company cars. That was the first day I had ever used it, had it on that day. I don't know why. I don't have a clue. Anyway, I woke up in the hospital on a gurney. This old doctor's leaning over me, and he's sewing me all up. And then he asked me, he said, "Son, you think you got a problem with alcohol?" I said, "No, man, alcohol didn't have anything to do with this. And it was a lack of sleep that caused this." And I was convinced that that's what it was. And over the years, I thought about that, why that old doctor asked me that. Well, after I got sober, I was in a meeting one night, and somebody said something that drew me back to that day on the gurney. and all of a sudden it came to me why that doctor asked me that question. Because he could smell the alcohol coming out of the pores of my skin. And if you're a drunk like me, you know exactly what that smells like. And so that was cleared up into my mind after I got sober, but it wasn't going to be yet. I had a lot more drinking to do. Well, I had met an old boy with Standard Oil Company from Denver, and he suggested to me that I had more talent than to be wasting it down in the Louisiana swamps in the oil field. He said, "You need to come to Houston with me." He said, "I've got a company down there that they sell all kind of refined products and all kind of fuels and stuff," and said, "They're looking for young guys like yourself." So I told my wife, I said, "I'm going to go to Houston. I'm going to get another job, and I want you and our daughter, Deidre, to go back to stay with your mother in Wichita Falls, and I'm going to Houston." And I walked in, and I told the company, I said, "I'm going to give you 2 weeks' notice." I said, "You don't have to. You can leave right now." You start tearing up the company equipment and smelling like you're drunk all the time, they don't miss you. So I went on to Houston with him, walked in, had 2 interviews that day, walked out of there that afternoon about 4 o'clock. I had a new job, driving a new car, driving and wearing better clothes, drinking better whiskey, and drinking in better places, lots better places. This company had a bunch of private club memberships. They had a suite at the Astrodome. They said, take these customers to the ball game. They had a private lake down at Brazoria. Take them fishing. Take them to play golf. Take them. We had a hunting lease down in South Texas. Take them deer hunting and buy them plenty of whiskey. You got the right cat for that job. And I'd buy a case of scotch and a case of bourbon, put it in the trunk of my car. I put an empty case in between. A customer could have one or the other. He couldn't have one of each. So when I gave a customer a fifth, I put one of each of those in my box. I always had plenty to drink. I had hundreds of friends, seemed like, but I never thought that was stealing. Not until after I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous did I ever look at that as stealing. Well, I'm rocking along, and I had gone to a couple of sales meetings, and one in New Orleans, and I met a guy with a same company but in another city, and he called me one day and said, "Would you like to take a transfer up to Dallas?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I had never thought about that." And he said, "We want to fly you up here." So I flew up to Dallas, and he and 2 of his salesmen met me at Love Field, and we go out drinking, and I remember they said, we got you a room, and so I had an overnight bag. We never went. I don't know where it was. We stayed out drinking all night. And the next morning, after our partying, he said, "You let me out at the airport." He said, "You going to take this transfer?" I said, "I believe I will." I'm on a plane going back to Houston. I thought, well, you don't even know where the office is. You don't know if the commission plan is going to be the same, but different or better. It doesn't matter. I'm with my people. So August 15, 1968, I moved to Dallas. Nothing, absolutely nothing changed. I still couldn't go home at night. I still hung out in those bars. I did well in Dallas, and they had a guy in Fort Worth that ran the Fort Worth branch, and he was retiring. And I had made a good impression, and they thought I was management material, and they asked me if I would be willing to go and be the branch manager in Fort Worth. It had only been about 6 or 8 months I'd been there, and I said yes, I did that. Now I'm managing a bunch of people, and I'm not out driving around, and I could drink all I wanted to. And that's what I did. And I can remember when my first child was born in Wichita Falls. I was home in bed with her mother, where I should have been, when her water broke, the bags were packed. We'd get up and we'd go to the hospital, and she has the baby. And when the second child was born, I was down in Arlington, right near Fort Worth. Been drunk down there for a week attending a school sales meeting. And I knew that second child was about to be born, and I thought, well, I better get on back home. And it was in the middle of February. It was sleeting and snowing. I'm heading back up there, and I pulled in front of the house, and she's walking out the door with her bag. She's about to drive herself to the hospital on that one, and I got on the tail end of that. And our third child was born in Fort Worth. And when he was born, I was drunk in Jimmy's Club, one of my favorite drinking establishments. And a friend of mine came down, and he said, "Your wife's in the hospital. She's having that baby, and you're too drunk to drive." So he drove me down. I walked in. She'd already had him. And he was behind those glasses before you could go in the room with him, and I could look at him. She's in another little room, and I went in there and said, "You did a great job, gal. I'll see you tomorrow." And I went right back to that bar where I stayed the rest of the night. And for a long time, I didn't know who stayed with those kids. I really didn't care. But I was telling this story at Cook Forest 10 or 12 years ago. And right when I got to that point, I remembered who stayed with those kids. My mother lived in Mississippi, and my wife had made arrangements for her to come out and stay with those kids because she knew I could not be counted on. And that's who stayed. And I was able to make amends to my mother for a lot of things, but not that one, because I didn't remember it till it was too late. She had already passed away. So that's the kind of husband and father I was, and I'm not proud of that. That's just where alcohol took me. Well, along about that time, I told my company, I said, "Look, I'm tired. I don't like managing these people. Let me come back to Dallas and sell." And so they let me do that. I went back into the field selling, and we bought another house, and I still couldn't go home. I'm still doing that same scene. And so one afternoon, I'm at another one of my all-time favorite drinking establishments. It was about 4 o'clock. I got a double scotch in each hand, and I started thinking again. That same mistake, thinking while drinking. And what came to me was, you really need to be single. This family life is holding you back from enjoying life. I ran home and got all my stuff, my important stuff, my shotguns and my rifles and my golf clubs and my clothes, and I was about ready to escape. And my wife came in the back door with my middle child. He was 7. I don't know where the youngest one and the oldest one were, but she had my middle child with her, and they saw my car, and I had done that a couple of times. So but you don't really mean it sometimes. You just want to get rested up, and after you get rested up, come back home and say, "I'll never do it again." And I'd done that a few times. But that day, she recognized what I was doing, and she came in and she was crying. She had never worked outside the home. She'd always been a stay-at-home mom. And She's crying, and she said, "What are we going to do if you leave?" And my son got out on his hands and knees, and he was holding me around my right ankle, looking up at me with tears in his eyes, crying, saying, "Dad, don't leave us. What's going to happen to us?" He wouldn't let go. And a fit of rage came over me, and I kicked him down the hall, kicked him away from me. He went railed up against that wall. I turned around, walked out of that house, didn't even look back, and never gave it a thought. Within an hour, I was back in that same bar drinking again. I didn't think about it again until after I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, as you could guess by now, that marriage is done. It's over. It took a little while, but we got done with it. And so I'm really out drinking now. And I'm out drinking with some of my old pals, and one of them said, "Hey, I'm getting married next Friday. Won't you come to my wedding?" I said, "Man, I don't do weddings." I just got a divorce. He said, "You been married all this time?" And I said, "Yeah, I know I didn't act like one, but yeah." I said, "But I'm not coming to your wedding." And I didn't go. I don't know, it was maybe 3 or 4 days after that. I'm over in Fort Worth at the Colonial Golf Tournament, minding my own business down in the bar. And so I look over there, and there she is, right over there, sitting by the window, taking her a free girlfriend. So I go over there, and I ask her, I said, "You mind if I sit with you girls?" "No." I said, "I bought him a drink." And so the one I had my eye on, I said, where are you from?" She said, "I'm from Dallas." I said, "Oh, I'm from Dallas too." I said, "Give me your number. I want to take you out." She said, "No, guys like you are too much trouble." And so she got up and went to the restroom, and I asked her friend, I said, "Give me her number." So she wrote it down. I stuck it in my pocket. I go back by the water fountain and catch her when she comes out of the restroom. I said, "I got your number, and I'm calling you up, and we're going out." She said, "All right, big boy, you want to go out? Let's just go out tonight." I said, "Well, I can't tonight." She said, "Why not?" I said, "I already got a date." She said, "Well, why don't you break it?" I said, "I don't do things like that. I wouldn't break a date with her to go with you, and I wouldn't break a date with you to go with her. That's just the kind of guy I am." She told me much later, she said, "I thought that meant you had character." Instead, you are one. And I kept the date with that girl. Don't remember her name, don't remember what she looked like. The next morning, I called her up, and I said, "I've got those tickets to the golf tournament. Would you like to go?" She said, "I believe I will. And if we can make it to November, we'll be married 46 years. None of that was easy, let me tell you. She had 2 kids by a previous marriage, and I had those 3. I've already told you about that. Well, we hadn't been married a month, and my oldest one decided she wants to come live with us. And then all of a sudden, alcoholism started breaking out all over our house. Give me an example. Get a call one day from Dallas police. Said, "You have some kids named Darby and Kevin?" And yes, we do. "Well, we got them in jail again." "What do you got them in jail for this time?" "Well, they threw a water balloon off the North Dallas Tollway and busted a windshield out of a lady's classic car." And I'm thinking it's a Bentley or something like that. I get downtown, it's a 1960 Dodge Dart. But you try to buy a windshield for one of those little suckers. Next day, Hillcrest High School call. "You got one named Kevin?" "Yes, I do." "Well, he's smoking in a non-smoking area." "Well, okay, I'll come get him." Next day, FBI call. "You got two girls named Deidre and Stacy?" "Yes, we do." "Well, do they know it's a federal offense to make long-distance phone calls and charge them to at-random numbers out of the phone book?" I said, "Probably not, but I'll explain it to them." It wasn't the same kid every day, but one of them was doing something every day. And when Beverly was talking yesterday, I had forgot clean about this. She reminded me when she was talking about growing pot for her kids. Well, we knew our kids smoked them left-handed cigarettes, but we thought that was not a big deal, as long as you don't do it in the open. And but Kay, on the other hand, this was after we had gone to Al. She had been to a couple of Al-Anon meetings by this time. And boy, she got on a tear. She found every stash they had. They had some pot and a little plastic cover case in the back tank of one of the toilets. They had some pot on a string hanging behind a light switch down in the wall. She found that. I asked her one time, they called her Dickless Tracy. She drove them nuts. And I asked her, I said, how'd you find that pot in the wall? And she said, you know the light switch, the plate? I said, yeah. She said it was crooked a little bit. I could see the paint line. And I said, that's not right. And she got to screwing with it, and she saw a piece of string, and she pulled the pot up out of the wall. So she was their worst nightmare, let me tell you, when she went to Al-Anon. Boy, man. I thought about that yesterday when Beverly was talking. But those kids, they were just driving us nuts. I had no idea it was alcoholism. I had no idea that I was one of y'all. I didn't know it. And so we're rocking along there, and our second oldest she was a senior at Southwest Texas State down at San Marcos. And she called one day, and she said, I got to drop out of school. This was her junior year. It was right around Thanksgiving. She said, I'm going to have to drop out. I can't go to class anymore. Her mother said, why? She said, I can't stop drinking. And so Kay flew to Austin and got a rental car and went down to San Marcos to check her out of school. We brought her home, and I didn't know what happened. I was just plain unaware of any problems that drinking was causing. I knew it was a pain in the butt, but I didn't have any idea about alcoholism. However, my sister and brother-in-law had been sober in AA for about 5 years, and I wouldn't go see them. They were nuts. All their friends were nuts. I remember one time we went to a Christmas party they had, and we walked in. There was about 100 people in the house. Everybody was drinking a cup of coffee, smoking a cigarette, and eating a cookie, all at the same time. They made me nuts. I had to go back to the hotel. I couldn't stay around that. But somehow my wife knew that my sister knew something about not drinking. And she called her, and she told her what she thought we should do. If she can't quit drinking, then she probably needs to go to treatment. If she wants to stop drinking, won't you just send her to take her to AA? And she didn't want to do that. So we took her to a treatment center and an evaluation thing, and they said, yes, she's alcoholic. And Zoom, man, she was gone. They sent her up to Chicago because they found out she also had something else. She had bulimia, eating disorder thing, along with her alcoholism. So she was gone. And a week later, the second kid came to us, my son, and he said, if you think what she's doing is bad, listen to what I'm doing. And he'd been not only drinking, but taking some other substances, and one of the nerves in his leg was dead, or he thought it was dying, and he thought something was causing his drinking and drug taking. We took him to another treatment center, and they took him in. And about 10 days later, the third one came to us. He said, if you think they got trouble, listen to what all I'm doing. And we took him to another treatment center. So within 20 to 25 days, 3 of our 5 kids were in treatment for alcoholism. But we did not know what hit us. And they said, go to Al-Anon. Well, I went with her to Al-Anon for a couple of those meetings, and I'm thinking, this ain't for me. And they agreed. No, this is not for you. You need to go in that other room down there. And so I started going to meetings. I didn't quit drinking. I didn't want to quit drinking. Didn't tell you I wanted to quit drinking. I just started going to meetings, hoping I'd get back in the big bed. And nothing happened. Things went right along. So I hang around you guys for about 22 months, and went to a lot of meetings, met a lot of good people, a lot of good old timers. I want to say shout out to the old timers. It's you guys who were here when I got here that shared all the stuff and kept the doors open like you're still doing. And for guys like me, to get sober. And gosh, they were taking me with them everywhere. I didn't want to go, but somebody said yesterday, Gary, maybe get in the car. I don't remember, but anyway, that's all they told me, get in the car. Just get in the car. And that's what I did. I remember when I finally kind of zeroed in that, hey, maybe I do have a drinking problem. Their favorite thing was to take me to Denny's. You know, those big long tables up against the brick wall. They'd slide me all the way in against the wall, and they'd get in there and tell all those old war stories. I'm thinking, oh my God, how it happened here? I'm glad they did, because without that, you ought to have another speaker this morning. They just took care of me and answered my questions, and God, I love those old guys. It was a wonderful, wonderful beginning in Alcoholics Anonymous for me. My first sponsor, he sponsored me for the first 6 years I was sober. He got lung cancer, and he was dying. And I went to see him just about 4 or 5 days before he passed away. He was at home with hospice, and I'm sitting on the edge of his bed, and he'd had a big book, and he had written me something in it, and he gave it to me. And I said, Jack, I got to ask you something. I said, a time like this, has fear returned to you yet? He said, oh, not a bit. I said, how can you stay here and this close and tell me you're not consumed with fear? He said, oh, that's easy. He said, because I believe God is who he says he is. And I knew he believed that. He said, you know, my old body's wearing out. He said, God made it that way. But my spirit's going to soar. And it does. I feel him in every meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous I go to. I can see him right now sitting right back there with his legs crossed on that back row with a cup of coffee. And I miss him. I've had 5 sponsors. The first 4 I buried. They all died sober. And my current sponsor I've had about 9 years. And when I went to my very first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, the last Friday night in November 1986, this man was speaking that night. And he nailed me. And as a matter of fact, I credit him with saying the magic words that made me want to keep coming back. Well, 4 sponsors later, my 4th one's dying, and I had seen Paul all around in AA all over those years. And I called him up. I said, Paul, I said, my sponsor's dying, and I'm going to need another one. I was wondering if you would be willing to sponsor me. I said, before you answer, I need to tell you I'm fixing to bury the 4th one. If that makes you nervous, I understand. He said, no, I think I'll just roll with you. And so he's been my sponsor for the last 9 years. And he has been a godsend. About 7 years ago, a little over, my wife was acting strangely. Unlike her, her temper was getting short over the littlest, smallest thing. And it was just out of her character. I walked in one day, and her car keys were in the refrigerator. And that kind of bothered me. And so I started paying real close attention to what she was doing or not doing. And I knew something was wrong. I talked to our family doctor, and he said, you need to get her in to see a neurologist, because I told him what was going on. I did every trick I could think of to take her in, and she would not go. So a couple times I had called 911 when she was just unruly at night. She couldn't sleep, and I didn't know what was happening to her. We lived way out in the country on a lake by this time, and so right at the end, she thought her mother was living with us. Her mother had been dead since 81. And then her dad had been dead since 84, and she started calling me by his name. I knew something is not right here. So one night she came to me. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't work. I couldn't do anything. I was trying to take care of her by myself. It almost killed me. And so one night I was asleep. It's about 11 o'clock. She came in and woke me up. We couldn't no longer sleep together because she thought I was her father. And she said, fathers don't sleep with their daughters. You have to go sleep in the den. And so I wouldn't argue with it. I'd just get up and go on the couch in the den and go to sleep. And that was still going on. So she came in and woke me up, and she said, her dad was a bad drunk years ago. And she got me awake, and she said, we got to take Mom to the hospital. Dad just beat her up. And I thought, well, this is a good chance for me to get her in the car and take her to Dallas, and I can take her to an emergency room, because I had called 911 a couple of times, and it was when she was unruly and had a pistol one night, and they came, and I said, send me a doctor, don't send me a bunch of cops. They always send cops. And the last time that happened, the cops came, and I told them what was going on. He said, the cop says, there's no law against having dementia, and he got in his car and left. But this night, when she offered me to let's take her mother to the hospital, I walked in my closet, took my pajamas off. There's a light on in the closet. The light in the bedroom is off. And I just sensed somebody behind me. And I turned around. She had a pair of scissors, and she was fixing to run them in my back. She thought I was a burglar looking for her jewelry. I said, Kay, if you don't give me those scissors, I'm going to call 911. She said, call them, buddy. I don't know who the hell you are. I grabbed the phone. I called 911. And I'm talking to them. In her true Al-Anon spirit, she said, you're not telling that right. And she grabbed the phone and handed me the scissors. And so she's talking to the 911 lady, and I take the scissors in the kitchen and put them on top of the refrigerator. They talked for about 20 or 30 minutes, and sure enough, they sent 2 cop cars, an ambulance, and a fire truck. And by the time they got there, she was all over the map, and they saw what was going on, and they said, we got to take her in. I said, no. They took her to a psych ward, and I went to see her the next morning, and they said, we got to take her to a long-term psych ward. They sent her off there. I'd go see her every day, and she didn't know who I was. She was just wild. 5 days later, they called and said, your wife has got vascular dementia with homicidal tendencies, and she's never coming home to live with you again. You've got 5 days to find her somewhere to go. You need a memory care place. And I found a place, and she'll be there 7 years come October the 3rd. And she's at the point now where she's in a wheelchair. She doesn't know who I am. It's getting harder and harder to go see her. I love her, and I want to go, but it's the hardest thing I've ever done, is to go, and all I can do is sit there and hold her hand for an hour. She doesn't even know who she's holding hands with, but I know. I know. One of the hardest things I've ever done. And I don't know the outcome of this. When she first went in there, I said, how long is an average they live like this? They said, 3 to 5 years is a pretty good average. But they said, don't be surprised if she goes 20. And that may be where she's headed. I don't know. I've had a very difficult time with her daughter, my stepdaughter, who I raised since she was 11. We were right in the middle of doing our wills when she had the stroke. And I finished mine, but she couldn't finish hers. And so when she went into that memory care place, the attorney called and he said, hey, I don't know if you thought about this. You can't even give her an aspirin without a power of attorney and have all those wills in place. And he said, it's too late to get her to sign a will, so you're going to have to go get a guardianship. I had to go get a guardianship, put everything we had under that guardianship. Her daughter and son were at the courthouse the day this was done, and everybody was in agreement. Except 30 days later, the daughter didn't agree. And she started taking me to court. We had accumulated about $400,000 in our retirement account. I spent almost $300,000 of that fighting her off. And she got hers. She got a pro bono attorney for her. And she went to the court. She lied. She did everything she could to cause us difficulty. Along about that same time, my stepson had back surgery. He came out paralyzed. And so I've got Kay at home. This is just before they took her to the psych ward. This was about a week before. I had Kay home trying to take care of her. The son was in a rehab for his back surgery. They called us, and he was married. They called us and said, "You got to come get him. His insurance is running out. You got to come get him and take him to your house." I said, "Lady, I don't have to do a damn thing." I said, "He's got a wife." She said, "Yeah, we've already talked to her. She's divorcing him. She's not going to have anything to do with it. She travels for a living." I looked at Kay and I said, "Kay, how can we do this?" She looked at me. She said, "If it was your kid, I'd do it." And I knew she would. So that's what we did. We brought him to our house. We changed the guest bathroom into a handicapped bathroom. We moved all the furniture out of the guest room, moved a hospital bed in. A church organization came and built a handicap ramp on the front of our house so he could get in and out. I was taking him to therapy twice a week, and he's in a wheelchair, and I got a broken foot. I'm hustling him to rehab twice a week, trying to figure out what's hiding all the knives and the guns and the scissors from her. And I almost lost my mind. My sponsor and the God of my understanding saved me. It absolutely did. And I don't know how this thing's all going to work out. I really don't have a clue. All I know is I've got to be ready to do whatever it is I need to do. All these things, some of these tragic things that I'm sharing with you today, all that stuff happening, not one time have I thought it was a good idea to take a drink. Never been on the radar, not one time. But I've had a lot of support with my AA community. One of my good AA buddies, one time, he was reminiscing with me and miserating with all what was going on. And he's one of those guys that always has the bright spot. He said, "Well, there's one good thing. God will never give you more than you can carry." I said, I believe that. I just wish he didn't have so much confidence in me sometimes. But out of all that, I've remained sober, and I remember how blessed I have been. I remember hearing a story once. This is before I got sober. I was going to meetings, but I was still drinking. Wasn't drinking this weekend because they'd taken me off to a conference that weekend. And I heard a speaker. And he nailed me with this story because up until that time, I had wondered from time to time, why me, Lord? Why am I an alcoholic? And then I heard this story, and this guy he told the story about the old rabbi who was teaching a religious science course at UCal Berkeley. And one day, he only had about 6 or 8 grad students in his class. And one day, one of them said, the rabbi said something about a blessing, and one of the students said, "Rabbi, what is a blessing?" The old rabbi kind of stroked his beard a little bit, and he said, God created the universe. He did so in 6 days. He made earth, moon, and stars and looked at what he had made and said, this is good. He made horses and cows and pigs and goats and looked at what he had made and said, this is good. He made fish and peas and lettuce and looked at what he had made and said, this is good. But on the sixth day, he made man, but said nothing. Are there any conclusions? One guy said, yeah, people are no good. He said, well, it's a possible conclusion, but a bad translation. He said, in English, the word good means many things. A good day, have a good day, a good book, the good book, for a good time call. Good means many things in English, but in Hebrew, which is the language God spoke, he looked at what he had made and said, this is Tov, T-O-V. What is Tov? Well, Tov means something is whole. Tov means something is entire. Tov means something is exactly the way it's supposed to be. It can't be any other way. So, God made earth, moon, and stars. Tov. He made fish and peas and lettuce. Tov. He made horses and cows and pigs and goats. Tov. But people were not born complete. People were born full of holes with lots of broken areas and lots of jaggedness. So what are you supposed to do? Well, in the course of a lifetime, you're supposed to fill in some of the holes. You're supposed to rub smooth some of the jaggedness, fill in around those broken areas. If we're born male, we're supposed to grow into men. If we're born female, we're supposed to grow into women. We're supposed to grow into real, live human beings. But, he said, as we walk our path, as we live life's journey, anything that gets behind us and pushes us ahead, anything that gets in front of us and drags us forward, anything that gets deep down inside of us where it's cold and it's dark and there's no air there and no light there, yet it kicks, it pushes, and it shoves till there is air there, till there's light there. Anything that does that is a blessing. And sometimes blessings don't feel good. Most of the time we don't even know they're blessings until years later we look back at a situation at the time we thought would kill us. Instead, it opened doors we never even knew were there. And when I heard that story, I understood about my alcoholism, something that I thought was the very worst thing that could ever happen to a human being. Turns out one of the greatest blessings I've ever been given. It's because of people like you, rooms like this, and a God I found in Alcoholics Anonymous. And to think I could have missed it all. Thank you so much.